Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Shelley Buffone. I'm a part of the PLBRA Residents Association. I'd like to welcome you all today. Special thanks to all the candidates for taking time to come talk to us today. I know if you guys are anything like me, you're undecided and you want to learn more about the candidates before you make your decision. And that's what today's all about. So, without further ado, we're going to kick it off, and I'm going to give you a little intro about the candidates before they get a chance to speak themselves. We have some panel questions, and then we're going to open it up to a Q&A. All right, here we go. Our first candidate is Katie. Katie Young Yaroslawski. Katie grew up in West Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley. She's a climate attorney and a mom to 3 young children who claims to have the tools, experience, and backbone to hit the ground running. In 2011, she became the General Counsel and Director of Government Affairs at the Climate Action Reserve, which worked with the state of California's Air Resources Board and multiple entities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In 2015, the LA County Supervisor recruited her to serve as the Senior Policy Advisor, covering the environment and the arts. Through 2018, she developed, negotiated, and steered board adoption of Measure W, the Safe Clean Water Program. She led the effort to create the Clean Power Alliance, a coalition of 32 local cities and counties which provides a green energy alternative for Southern California Edison customers that went on to provide 100% renewable power to more customers than any other utility in the United States. 2 of her endorsements include the Sierra Club and Planned Parenthood. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Katie Young Yaroslawski.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for putting this on. I know it's a lot of work, and it's a beautiful day, so there are a lot of other places you could be, and I'm thrilled that you're choosing to spend your time in this way. As was noted, I'm an environment and climate attorney. I'm a regional policymaker. I'm a mom. My husband, Dave, and I have 3 young kids. We live just half a mile or so south of here, and our youngest actually goes to a home daycare in PLBRA, so I'm here almost every day. I spent a decade in the private sector, and most recently for the last 6 years, I've done regional policy making on behalf of LA County's 10, now 12 million people after the new census. And if I learned anything in my time working in government, it's that it really matters who's there. The people in these seats of power have an incredible amount of power, and when they're there because they want to do the job that they were elected to do and fully wield that power to make positive, meaningful change on behalf of and in partnership with communities, you can get a lot of really good stuff done. And I've had this incredible opportunity to do that at the county, and I'm going to bring that experience to the city. And it's important to bring that perspective because so many of the problems we're facing as a city, homelessness, public safety, our economy, public health, climate, these aren't City of LA problems alone. These are regional problems, and they're going to require regional solutions and collaborations. And I have partnerships and relationships all the way up to the federal government. I'll be able to leverage those relationships and the understanding of how it all works and how it all fits together to meaningfully problem solve on everything from homelessness to public safety to making our communities greener and more sustainable. And those are really my priorities around homelessness. There's a lot of work we need to be doing across the board. There's no one thing, there's no one silver bullet. Everything from prevention to getting people off the streets faster, to mental health and addiction services and programs, to better coordination between the county and the city. None of the things we're facing as a city are going to be easy to solve, but when we have people there who want to use the tools of government to actually problem solve, we can make meaningful progress, which is why I have the endorsement of the LA Times, Congresswoman Karen Bass, and as was mentioned, the Sierra Club, Planned Parenthood, and hundreds of community leaders across the spectrum, everyone from neighborhood council leaders to lay and faith leaders, and everyone in between, and be grateful for your vote as well. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you, Katie. Next up, we have Sam Brea. Sam is a nearly lifelong resident of the 5th District and a father of 4 young children. He works as a workers' rights attorney in his own law firm. He co-founded 30 Years After, a local nonprofit that engages thousands of immigrants and first-generation Americans in civic life. He also served as a board member of 10 different community nonprofits, including Bed to Zec Legal Services, where he has worked as a pro bono lawyer for low-income tenants facing eviction. He says he is running for city council because The dream that Los Angeles once offered to families like his is slipping away, and Angelinos in the 5th District and across Los Angeles are suffering from a lack of leadership. 2 of his endorsements include the AFS-CME Local 1083, which is the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, and the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Sam Yabri.
Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be with you. My name is Sam Yabri. Thank you to the Resident Association for your hard work to advocate and organize on behalf of the residents here at PLBRA. I lived not too far from here when I was in law school at Detroit 4th, so spent a lot of time here and it's nice to be back. I'm running for Los Angeles City Council because the city that I love, the city that's enabled my refugee family to live the American dream, the city where my wife and I are raising 4 young kids and where I've started a business, is broken. And the career politicians and their staffers and family members who broke this city are simply unable and unwilling to bring the change that we need to make Los Angeles vibrant, affordable, and safe again. When my family and I arrived here, we were blessed to find an affordable place to live in West LA. As a 1-year-old kid, we were refugees. I went to great public schools in the 5th District, went to Yale and USC for law school. When I came back to Los Angeles, I became a workers' rights attorney fighting for workers. But my passion has been fighting for folks who are vulnerable in this city ever since. I've been on the board of numerous nonprofits like Vet Legal Services, on the board of EDA, which builds housing for adults with special needs, and we're building a transformative 64-unit housing project on Kiko near Doheny for adults with special needs to live and also to work there on site. But I got a first-hand view of how difficult it is to build affordable and supportive housing in the city. It took us 3 years simply to go through the permitting process in our city. I've also served Los Angeles as a city commissioner, overseeing the recruiting, training, and discipline for city employees. I went through LAPD's gun violence prevention, I served on gun violence prevention task force, went through LAPD's Citizens Academy because public safety, as you can imagine, as a father of 4 young kids, is incredibly important for me, and I chair the public safety committee in my neighborhood and in South Westwood as well. I'm running because the crises of homelessness and poverty, public safety have gotten worse every day, and it's time for new leadership. I'm proud to have the broadest coalition of support in this race, the business community, labor community, fire department, and our 1,300 leaders throughout the 5th District, because we know that we need new perspectives from outside if we're going to have a chance to reverse the decline of our city. And I'm really proud to be here to have this conversation with you. I look forward to talking to you about homelessness and public safety, and really, finally, making sure we get world-class city services befitting the world-class city that Los Angeles is and should be again.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, next up we have Scott Epstein. Scott is an Angelino who commutes by bike and bus and walks his daughter to school every day. Epstein has worked alongside Councilmember Koretz for the past 11 years as his Director of Policy. He served as chair of Mid-City West Neighborhood Council from 2014 to 2020. As a founder of the Midtown Los Angeles Homeless Coalition, he created the space that led to the only bridge home shelter in CD5. Scott says he is running for City Council to make LA work for all of us, and will bring leadership to City Hall that is grounded in community, guided by compassion, and focused on results. Of the work that needs to be done, Scott says we need to comprehensively address our housing crisis. He believes that action needs to include protecting renters and increasing housing opportunities for folks at all income levels. 2 of his endorsements include Abundant Housing LA and Streets for All. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Scott Epstein.
Thank you so much, Shelley. Just one quick correction. So I did not work for Paul Koretz. It's a little confusing because there was a candidate in this race named Jeff Ebenstein, a very similar last name, who dropped out about a year ago from the race. My name is Scott Epstein, it's wonderful to be here at PLBRA. We love canvassing here and talking with the community members. I'm a longtime community leader. I was the chair of the Mid-City West Neighborhood Council, which represents PLBRA for 7 years, and I founded a nonprofit organization called the Midtown Los Angeles Homeless Coalition. My priorities are making LA affordable, comprehensively addressing homelessness, and taking local action on climate change. And what differentiates me from the other candidates in the field is that I have been in the community building real solutions on these issues for a decade. So for example, Shelley mentioned this project, the La Cienega Bridge Home Shelter, which was birthed at Midtown Los Angeles Homeless Coalition meeting. It's the only new shelter in the entire council district of 250,000 people, and it is now serving families experiencing homelessness at a repurposed motel on La Cienega Boulevard. It's that kind of place-based, on-the-ground solution making that I have been practicing for a decade, and I will bring to this office to fix the problems on the ground. Another example, as the chair of Mid-City West Neighborhood Council, we created a concept for safer streets for walking and biking. It's called the Mid-City Neighborhood Greenway Project. It attracted $2.3 million from Metro Los Angeles. It's the first time a neighborhood council has ever accomplished something like that. And we did it on $42,000 a year that we got from the city. That's a pretty good return on investment, right? That's the kind of leadership I'm going to bring to the city council. The other thing that I will mention is, it's important that our leaders have the lived experience to understand what regular Angelenos are going through. I am a renter. My family, my wife, and our 4-year-old daughter, and I live in a duplex in Carthay Square. A year ago, we moved from the Fairfax district there. And when we were in the Fairfax district, I think we were living in the smallest 2-bedroom in the entire council district.
I'm sorry, Scott, that's time.
Is that time? Look forward to talking more about these issues.
Thank you, Scott. So next up we have Jimmy Blars. Jimmy is a professor at UCLA Law School who grew up in a small duplex apartment on Cardiff Avenue in the Pico Robertson neighborhood. Jimmy worked for David Gergen at CNN and began a JD, PhD sociology and social policy degree at Harvard. During his time there, he worked in the LA Public Defender's Office, as well as served as one of the resident tutors in the Elliott House, advising and mentoring hundreds of LGBTQ students. Jimmy's family was evicted from their home when he was only 12 years old to make way for a McMansion. He recalls the helplessness he felt in that situation and that has been motivating him ever since to serve his community. He says that his experience instilled in him the belief that everyone deserves a decent place to live in a city as rich as Los Angeles, and the fact that housing insecurity can happen to anyone. He states that he is running to get to the heart of this issue, one of LA's most pressing problems, to make sure that this is a city that every Angeleno can afford to call home. 2 of Jimmy's endorsements include the LA Public Defenders Union, the Local 148, and Honor Pack. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please help me to welcome Jimmy Blars.
Thank you. How's everyone doing? Good? Good turnout for a Sunday afternoon. Real political bunch. I love it. You beat me to the punch on a bit of my bio, so apologies for any repetition. As you know, I'm Jimmy Blars, and my backstory starts just down the road from here in Pico Robertson. I grew up in a little duplex apartment in the heart of Jewish LA. I like to say 1 block south of Synagogue Row off of Pico. And when I was 12, my family was evicted from our half of a duplex apartment. An out-of-state landlord wanted to build a single-family McMansion and told us we had a month and a half to leave. In the aftermath of the eviction, we were chased around the city by housing affordability, and both my parents struggled very, very seriously with substance use in the aftermath, and luckily have both been in long-term recovery. But the experience was a real political awakening for me. Couple that with coming of age under the dark cloud of Proposition 8, which I think some of the young folks in the room, I hope, are too young to remember what that was, but it certainly was quite powerful over my early life. And I've been working in inequality in politics ever since. I was at Hamilton High School. Any Yankees? No? Alas. Okay, usually there's 1 or 2 in Council District 5. And then I was at Harvard for college and graduate school and law school. And my academic work and my work at UCLA has all focused on the rise of income and wealth inequality, in particular how it intersects with housing issues. When my partner and I moved back, we lived just on Sweetser down the road. A few years ago, we were painfully struck by our city's homeless and housing crisis. It's something we all live with and experience every day. And I'm not one to knock public servants. It's a lot easier to be where I am criticizing than to be in the trenches actually trying to make a difference and move the needle on these seemingly intractable issues. But I did see a city that was failing to grapple with the magnitude of the crisis and to address its root causes and diagnose it in a way that gave us any shot at actually solving it. A city that was failing to grapple with the reality that wages have stayed completely flat for 50 years, and the cost of housing has gone up 11 times. And that gulf between the cost of housing and real wages being responsible for so much of the economic precarity that we see, so much of the homelessness that we see, and so much of the urban poverty that we see. That's really why I'm running, because I think we need to think bigger and I think we need to act bigger. And if we don't, Los Angeles will become a place that only the 0.01% can afford to live in, rather than the engine of social mobility that it has long been promised and imagined to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. All right, friends and neighbors, my name is Nicole Duquette. I'm proud to serve as the board secretary for the Park Brea Resident Association. I want to give a big thank you to Shelley, also board member, for her thoughtful introduction. And to Mark, Angela, and Toby, who are also on the board and here helping to organize this event today. All right, candidates, we have 6 panel questions for you. Jimmy, you're going to take the first turn on the first question, and we'll mix that up. You'll have 3 minutes to respond. 30-second response if you're invoked by another candidate.
How many to respond? 2 minutes?
3 minutes?
3 minutes.
I'm a former school teacher, school principal, so complicated questions.
Yeah.
They're not multiple choice. And then audience, we're trying to cover kind of the hot topics through the panel so they can give thoughtful responses to the issues we think are most pressing our residents. And then we will turn to Q&A from any of you who would like to ask any follow-up questions after that. Are we ready? Okay. Certainly the pandemic and the housing crisis are compounding the increase in homelessness that we're experiencing in the mid-city area. Reduced shelter capacity and reduced access to medical care are also driving the increase in encampments across the city. In the area around Park LaBrea, we have seen an increase in the past few months. Last year, between Ramon's approach at Pan Pacific Park and O'Farrell's approach at Echo Park, we saw large contrast in handling of encampments. What in their approaches would you encourage the City Council to continue, and what may you do differently? In addition to addressing encampments, how can we achieve effective rehousing? And please be clear, as 2 of you have a platform position on enforced shelter requirements. Jimmy, you're first.
Mike, or just talk?
It's up to you.
Okay, I think I'm just going to talk. I didn't mean to give you a look at 3 minutes, but 3 minutes is just so luxurious when we're used to a minute answer on homelessness, right?
Jimmy, can you use the microphone so
Oh,
that
yeah.
I can hear me?
So I'll start by talking about how I think about the homeless and housing crisis. And the analogy that I like best is to think of the crisis as an iceberg. The street encampments that we see are the very, very tip of a much, much larger iceberg. Beneath the surface of the water are hundreds of thousands of low-income Angelino families living on the financial brink. Tenants who are paycheck to paycheck on their rent. Folks who really live with a tremendous amount of economic stress related to housing. And you can have the most aggressive sweep people off the street approach to homelessness or build 65,000 units of permanent supportive housing overnight. And if you're not as deeply engaged with what's happening beneath the surface of the water, you'll just have a new tip of the iceberg emerge. So I believe the issues have to be discussed and treated as inextricably linked, and you have to be pushing both levers at the same time. To start with encampments, I am a research and data-driven academic. That is my orientation to policymaking, looking at models of places that have seen dramatic improvements in the issues that we find most intractable. There are cities and models out there of places that have seen dramatic reductions in the density of street homelessness, even among the most chronically unhoused, those with multiple substance use conditions and or mental disorders. I look to Houston as a model. Houston, Texas, has reduced the density of street encampments by 50% in the span of 2 years. And what they did was build out sufficient supply of housing resources. For some folks, that was permanent supportive housing, the full slate of mental health resources. For some, it was a shelter bed that was ongoing and semi-permanent. For some, it was inpatient treatment. For some, it was a rehabilitation center. And for some people, it was a bus ticket out of there. And then they hired 100 psychiatric social workers, mental health professionals who were well-trained and well compensated, going day in and day out to encampments consistently, methodically, and they could put their money where their mouth was because they had sufficient services to actually connect people to those services. And by creating such a tight web that no one was able to fall through, they saw day in and day out street encampments get smaller and smaller and smaller. For my money, that's the model. Robust and ongoing mental health-led street engagement from compensated and trained professionals who can actually give people a real, genuine offer of the right resources that work for them to get them into housing for good, so that we don't just see this problem move from Sweetser to Orlando to Kings to La Jolla, as I've seen in my own neighborhood. But that will only be so effective unless we're working to shore up the bottom of the end of the income distribution on the housing piece. Identifying families who are on the brink of eviction, fortifying them with financial resources, allowing more housing that is naturally affordable within Council District 5, because we know Council District 5 has not contributed its fair share to the housing ecosystem. Fighting tooth and nail for every affordable housing dollar that we can. If we're not pushing both levers at the same time, at best we're treading water on this issue. Thank you very much.
2 seconds to spare. Scott?
Thank you for the very important question. So let's start by recognizing, because you talk about street encampments, that they are a serious public health and safety issue for unhoused and housed folks alike. Now, how do we address it? Your question is very on point in terms of comparing the Nithya Raman approach in CD4 with the Mitchell-Farrell approach in CD13. We have evidence, and so the CD13 approach is an enforcement approach. It's the approach LA has been taking for decades. The CD4 approach is a care approach. It's about connecting people with the services that they need and the housing that they need. What are we learning about what works? It's the care approach that works. There's a UCLA study actually on the sweep that happened at Echo Park, and many of the people that are no longer living in the park are either unhoused or have died. So it hasn't worked very well. At the same time, in CD4, Nithya Raman, by staffing a 4-person team in her council office, has gotten many, many people off the street into transitional and permanent housing, and has eliminated street encampments in the process. So that's the approach we need to take. That's the approach that places like Houston and Salt Lake City have used effectively. That's what every city that has gotten to functional zero has done. So I'll tell you about what my approach is on homelessness. First, we need a comprehensive outreach system to our unhoused neighbors. The unhoused population is extremely diverse. So you have mental health and substance abuse, of course, but also LGBTQIA youth, foster kids that are aging out of the system, and it goes on and on and on. So we need service providers that understand those individual needs. And then importantly, we need somewhere to send folks to, right? And I'm a strong supporter of quickly getting up both temporary transitional housing and permanent supportive housing. So on the temporary side, that could look like safe camping, safe parking, repurposing motels, to give folks stability. And so that we know where folks are so that we can provide them services. And on the permanent side, we need to speed up the process. By streamlining, by using innovative construction methods, we can reduce the cost of these projects and deliver them more quickly as well. The other thing that I will say is we are never going to solve our homeless crisis if we don't solve our housing crisis. They are deeply linked. We are housing more unhoused folks than we ever have before, and yet we are creating new unhoused folks every day. That is all about the cost of housing in this city.
Sam?
Let's start off by talking about the fact that our unhoused population is not a homogeneous, monolithic community. We know there's many different paths into homelessness. The leading cause of homelessness among women is domestic violence. The leading cause of homelessness among individuals in their 20s is that they aged out or fell out of the foster care system, and 40% of those are LGBTQ youth. We have seniors who can't get access to their benefits and fall into homelessness, disabled veterans, and the list goes on. But we don't have enough paths out of homelessness. For those for whom it's economic, I think we're all going to agree here. We need better and more robust rental subsidies. We've got to scale Section 8. We need robust tenant protections, including a fully funded right to counsel for all low-income Angelenos, similar to our public defender system. And we obviously need to do more to prevent Angelenos from falling into homelessness. It's the best use of our dollars. But for the other population, at least half, for whom there's severe mental health, addiction issues, trauma-based issues, we have to do more, and that's where the city and the county together are not doing enough. And that's where I distinguish myself from the other candidates. I talk about multi-pronged strategy to help that population because we know that every single day, 5 Angelenos are dying in the streets of Los Angeles. And I'd say the biggest issue facing our city is not homelessness, not affordability, it's not crime, it's that there's this population of untreated mental illness suffering on our streets every single day. We have to do a better job. That requires changing our mental health laws. Right now, unless you're an imminent threat to yourself or someone else or greatly disabled, you can't be conserved. That has to change, and I'm proud to see Governor Newsom finally taking action on that. Second, we need more mental health beds. For a county of 10 million people, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was 81 beds for people who have mental health breakdowns, residential psych beds. We have to do a better job. I'm glad to see UCLA acquiring Olympia Medical Center, turning it into a psych hospital, and we have to do a better job to act with urgency to help transition people who are suffering and withering away and now dying in our parks, and next to our schools, and next to our libraries, and that's where the anti-camping ordinance comes into place. I support the ordinance. I'm the only candidate race who on day one said that he or she would use it because I know it's going to save lives. Our job as leaders is to alleviate and prevent suffering on the streets. If there's a tool available that will help someone on the street say yes, and that's what the service providers are telling us, that people are saying yes because now there is robust street engagement. There's notice being provided. There's credible offers of shelter. There's police officers are getting out of the way, and we're having mental health workers do the outreach to individuals who are living in these encampments. So what Mitchell Farrell and CD13 did, we can always debate the how, but what he did was the right thing. He helped move people out of this park into mental health and shelter and into housing, and the park is now available for the community of Echo Park to enjoy. It's one of the most beautiful parks in Los Angeles, and frankly, Pan Pacific is no different. There are growing encampments there. I was just there visiting a Little League, and they're in the outfield of Little League. There's an encampment. And that's not okay for our kids, and it's not progressive or humane or compassionate to allow people to suffer in our parks anymore.
Thank you.
So a lot has just been said. A lot of it's very similar. I will very quickly talk about how I think about this seemingly intractable challenge, which I don't think is. I wouldn't be running if I thought it was, because this is the biggest issue facing our city. So there's no one silver bullet for how we solve this, because as has been noted, there's no one reason people fall into homelessness. It's a bunch of different reasons, sometimes combinations of reasons together. I think about it in terms of 4 buckets of work, of things that we need to be doing all at the same time. First is prevention. Right now, more people are becoming unhoused every day than we're getting off the streets. So until we can slow the rate at which people are falling in, we are never going to be able to wrap our arms around the problem. And has been noted, we know which populations are overrepresented in our unhoused population, right? They've been talked about already. Seniors on a fixed income, people coming out of jail, youth aging out of the foster care system, and on and on. Most of these people are already accessing government services. They already come through government, mostly through the county, because the county does most of the social services. And so we have an opportunity when people come in, say, to make sure check on their CalFresh benefit. We can check and make sure that they're going to be housing secure for the next month or 2. If they're not, we can connect them to a rental voucher or get them connected to housing. Pilot projects have been done that show when you focus on prevention, targeted prevention upstream, even just a call a month, you keep people housed at almost twice the rate than they otherwise would be. So prevention is really important, and it's cost effective. It's a lot more effective. It's a lot more compassionate than to keep someone housed than waiting until they're on the streets before we wrap them in housing and services. And that's basically been our strategy, is waiting until they're on the streets before we get them off. So that's prevention. 2, people who are already on the streets, and this is where the encampment rule comes in. We need to do a better job of providing faster, more flexible housing. Building ground-up new construction that takes a couple of years and costs $500,000 or more per unit. While we need to be building that, it's not the only solution. It can't be the thing that we rely on. Master leasing existing buildings. rent vouchers, adaptive reuse of commercial buildings. So many of us who are fortunate to work from home right now, our old office buildings are sitting half empty. A RAND study just showed that you can affordably and quickly convert that into housing, much faster than ground up new construction. So that's quickly rehousing people, and then using 4118 can be used as a tool in very limited circumstances. So 4118 says you can't sleep here, you can't sleep there, you can't sleep there. All of those places are reasonable places to say unhoused people shouldn't sleep. Across the street from elementary schools, next to parks, etc. When the city council adopted 4118, they adopted a motion at the same time that said, we're going to do deep street engagement as part of 4118 implementation, offering people housing and services before we use it. And that is the limited context in which I support using 4118. If you're not offering people housing that actually works for them, you're just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, and that's unacceptable. Hoping to have a chance to talk about coordination between the county and the city and the need for mental health and addiction beds at a future time. Thanks.
While the increase in crime in Los Angeles is not as high as it is in other California cities, the rates of property and violent crime are both up, including a 17% increase in homicides and the death of one of our own building stewards a few months ago. Park La Brea is also especially a hotspot for property theft around vehicles, such as catalytic converters. Data from the first quarter of 2022 is not yet available, but we are all feeling an increase in crime in Mid-City and around Park La Brea especially. If elected, how will you guide the council to combat these increased rates? I would like to note that 3 of you look to expand and increase police funding, while 1 of you wants to reallocate funds to other intervention systems. So please be sure to include that in your approach. Scott, you'll take this one first.
Fantastic. Thank you for the question. So it's a very serious issue. I think the biggest problem we have on public safety is that we are spending our police dollars in very, very, very inefficiently. We need much more smarter approach to public safety than we have. So I don't know about you, but I don't really feel any safer from helicopters going over my head every week. And I don't think we have much evidence to suggest that that helicopter program that costs tens of millions of dollars every year is making us any safer. Using an enforcement approach on homelessness, if we have somebody experiencing a mental health episode on our streets, who is the first person to show up? Police officers. To be fair to them, they don't want to do that work. They're not trained for it. And they don't have the skills to address it. So smart reallocation of those dollars to mental health professionals, who are also, by the way, much cheaper to hire, is a fiscally sound policy and good policy in terms of getting to the root of the issue. We need to pare down our policing and focus it on violence prevention and community policing. Helicopters don't make me feel safe. But maybe a small police station in the Japanese model on Melrose Avenue, where we have seen quite an increase in crime, could help make folks safe. Foot beats, presence in the community could help people feel safe. So we need, and the other thing that I will say is we need to take a multifaceted strategy on what public safety means, right? Part of public safety is how safe our streets are. So lighting, street redesign, traffic calming, eyes on the street, vitality. We need to kind of use all the tools in the kit to make sure that we are and we feel safe.
Sam, go ahead.
So on this issue, this is one where my colleagues and I differ greatly. I think there's no more important responsibility for local government to make sure that everyone in Los Angeles feels safe in his or her neighborhood. Everyone deserves to feel safe. And I don't care whether crime is up or down in other big cities, and I don't care whether crime rates were a lot worse 30 years ago. I've never felt less safe in Los Angeles, and certainly in my adult life. I have 4 young kids. I'm worried about their safety. I walked to my local elementary school when I was a kid. My wife and I are not okay with our kids doing that anymore. So let's talk about statistics and facts. And you mentioned, you invoked his experience, we should mention his name, Jose Tomas Mejia, 50-year-old janitor who was murdered here June 16th of last year. And he's not the only one. In 2019 and 2020, there was one homicide in the Wilshire Division of LAPD, which runs from La Cienega, basically the end of Hancock Park. Last year, there were 13 homicides. And the Melrose community feels under siege, where there has been a lot of the homicides there. So violent crime is up. It's because of guns and gangs, but it's also because of a sense of lawlessness. It's also because there's this population of individuals with untreated mental illness. Gabe Deny, 31-year-old man on Maryland, who's murdered in his backyard. Brianna Kupfer at the Croft House, right? So I believe we need more police officers. When I served the city as a city commissioner 12 years ago, we had 10,000 police officers in America. So we're down to 9,300, and every single day that number goes down, not because of funding, because police officers are leaving the force for other city departments where they're treated better. So we got to stop demonizing police officers. The ones that don't do their job the right way, we're going to hold them accountable. We're going to make sure we train them better. But God bless them for running into the line of fire to protect our kids and our families. Okay. We also have to reduce and narrow their responsibilities. They're not social workers. We cannot give them every responsibility under the sun. We ask them to deal with mental health calls, all forms of domestic violence and crowd control and traffic stops, DWP lines going down, film production. Police officers need to deal with the guns and the gangs that are exploding throughout Los Angeles. Homicides are up 50%, gun shootings are up 50% and more. Arrests are way down. 50% of murders were solved in 2020. That's not okay. I also think we need to take advantage of the metro coming to, the subway coming to the west side to create substations. There's going to be 7 substations from Brea all the way to the VA on the west side. We need to make sure that these are clean and safe for everyone. We all heard of defund the LAPD, but there's also been defunding the Metro PD, the UCPD, UCLA PD, Library PD, park rangers. There are no more security guards at LA libraries. There are effectively no more park rangers in our parks. That's because of bad policy decisions by a leader. This is not binary. We can be safe, but we can also make sure policing is done right by narrowing responsibilities, getting police out of desk jobs, and out of things that don't require a gun. That's what I intend to do as the next council member.
The LAPD is a really important part of public safety, and I want to talk a little bit about that. The other half of the puzzle, though, is making sure we're investing in our communities, all of the communities of Los Angeles. Because if communities down in South LA don't have opportunities, we feel increases in crime up here. We're all connected to each other. And when we start to acknowledge that public safety is a regional issue, that we all are in this together, and that what happens in Council District 5 is inextricably tied to what happens in Council District 10 or Council District 1, I think then we can start to make meaningful progress on getting to the root of the problem. So let's talk briefly about LAPD. I support a well-staffed, well-funded, well-trained, accountable LAPD. We need officers on the street every day doing the job that they went to the academy to do and not responding to nonviolent or non-emergency mental health calls and homeless calls. There are pilots that are showing that this is a really efficacious way of splitting the duties. We need social workers and mental health professionals doing that work. Up to 70% of the calls that the LA Police Department and the Fire Department receive every day and every year are homeless calls and non-violent mental health calls. And so when we free them up to actually do the work they went to the academy to do, solving crime, crime prevention, doing community policing, having the same officers doing the same beat every day, getting to know the neighborhoods they serve and are in partnership with, that's how we start to create truly safe communities in partnership with the police department. The other side of it that I started off with, job training, workforce training, childcare, high quality public education, affordable housing, quality health care that's affordable. That's how we make truly, for the long haul, safe communities throughout Los Angeles. When we provide opportunities throughout Los Angeles, crime's going to go down. Now that's a longer term proposition, but we need to be doing both at the same time. We need to be investing for the long term and investing in a well-funded, well-trained, accountable police department. I'm committed to doing both.
Thank you. Mid-city residents struggle.
I think I have to go.
A little loud.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Jimmy.
So crime, as many remember, in the 1980s and 1970s was getting so high that folks never thought that the curve would bend and that we were just destined to keep going up and up and up in our crime rates. And all of a sudden, in the early 90s through the late 2010s, crime precipitously dropped. And we call it in social science the Great Crime Decline. And it is something that has been documented for decades and studied because it baffled policymakers, it baffled police departments, it baffled social scientists. How could crime so precipitously have turned the corner when we thought the rates were ever rising as just a part of our social fabric? And that's where I look. I look at what the best documented and best evaluation tools from that moment when we changed the course and the national direction of crime, and how do we readopt those policies that led to that decline. So to start, the research emergence from this great, rich area of study is the investment in spot policing, also known as hotspot policing or zone policing, where you concentrate police resources in areas that are experiencing dramatic upticks in crime. We know that focusing resources in those areas is a more effective strategy than wide calls for blanket increases in policing, because it focuses on the root of the problem and the actors that are most specifically engaged in violence. Second, looking a little bit closer to home. If anyone knows Father Boyle or a lot of the gang violence reduction work that we did in LA, and it was modeled in so many other cities, in New York, in Boston, in Seattle, you brought together credible community messengers with the police, with victims of violence and perpetrators of violence for ongoing, sustained conversations about the root causes of violence, the mental health realities that undergird so much of the violence we see, for restorative justice, for ongoing programs, sustained programs in various communities throughout Los Angeles that led to a reduction in violence. Coupling spot policing and strategic use of policing with a real engagement with perpetrators of violence by both the police and credible community leaders. That 1-2 reality was modeled in almost every major city that saw a dramatic decline in crime. That's also what worked in Los Angeles. The problem is that we abandoned those efforts almost as soon as we adopted them to create enduring and lasting public safety. As soon as crime starts to go down, that's not when you jump ship. That's when you double down. That's when you say, we have gotten crime the lowest we ever could have imagined it. We have an opportunity to preserve this as our lived reality. And that's where I want to move us toward. I agree with many of my fellow candidates about the need to build out supplemental systems for homeless engagement and mental illness. I believe in that strongly, and if we look at Portland, Oregon, and so many other models that have succeeded. But I would be remiss, we've been asked this question many times, if we didn't remember the intense public reckoning we've had over the last 2 years about the real limitations of policing and about the risks that police present, especially to some of our more vulnerable community members. And we have to remember that as we talk about this. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jimmy. Again, my apologies. Okay, start this one again. Mid-City struggles with access to freeways and public rail. The Purple Line is still feasibly years away. Our streets are narrow and ill-maintained, cracked concrete, broken pavement, and filled with trash. How will you prioritize improvements in city infrastructure, streets, and transportation specifically for Mid-City residents? And how can we look to use the broken windows theory of maintenance and beautification to support these infrastructure developments across our neighborhoods? And we're going to start with Sam on this one.
So you mentioned broken windows. Actually, it's a theory that in some ways we discredit because people don't like Giuliani, but in truth there is some merit in it, right? We think that small acts of disorder, trash and blight and businesses disappearing and it leads to other acts of disorder, ultimately leads to crime. So these are all linked. I think you can't talk about public safety without talking about transportation. You can't talk about transportation without talking about climate. You can't talk about climate without talking about affordable housing. These are all linked. So you mentioned the Purple Line. I can't tell you how excited I am about it. Right? These 7 subway stations are going to finally bring public transportation to the west side and mid-city area. It's going to connect our city, but we have to make sure it's done the right way. We've got to build affordable housing, workforce housing nearby, people can actually take these stations. We're making a nearly $10 billion investment in these subways and the Crenshaw extension and the PLBRA corridor transit project as well. But we have to make sure we navigate the housing imperative to be first and last mile so people can actually get to these stations. And of course, we have to have incentives. What's the point of building a lot of housing near transit if no one's actually going to take it, right? In terms of the infrastructure, this is an issue that I care deeply about. You can't walk a block in the city without being disgusted with the nature of our sidewalks and our streets, potholes, But if you look, if you explore this further, it goes more fundamental to our grid, our water system. Our entire infrastructure is 30 years out of date. We need a massive investment. Fortunately, there's some federal dollars coming in. There's a real chance to improve the west side and mid-city of Los Angeles, the 5th district. The next council member has to fight for those dollars, make sure they stay right here. We gotta make sure that anything that gets built in the mid-city area improves the infrastructure in the neighborhood. Make sure we mitigate any concerns if we do, if there's massive overdevelopment in any parts of town. There's a real opportunity to create win-wins. And I'm really excited to work with community, to work with every department in Los Angeles to make sure that we improve the sidewalks in our streets. You mentioned the broken sidewalks. We were just at the Grove, and we realized we were walking from the Grove to Pan Pacific Park in Fairfax, and that it's narrow and the sidewalks are broken. And I was meeting with the folks who are rebuilding the Museum of the Holocaust and doing a massive expansion. They said that's one of the biggest issues they're facing is trying to get someone from the city to return a phone call so they can improve and make an investment in infrastructure. So I will be that partner for folks in the nonprofit world and the Mid-City West Neighborhood Council to actually solve these issues, right? Because there's nothing more important on a daily basis to make sure we don't get a pothole when we drive down the street, make sure that there's a bike lane so folks can actually get around town safely, and make sure, to Scott's point, to his credit, he's done a lot of work in this area to make sure those bike lanes and the pedestrian corridors are safe, and that will be my priority as the next council member.
Thank you. Katie?
So when I was a kid, my mom was then state assembly member. Sheila Keel was district director, which means that she basically did constituent services for a lot of the west side and the San Fernando Valley. And so I grew up seeing the value proposition of what local government was really at the end of the day about. And I saw how much it meant to people that she could use the tools of government to actually problem solve. And talk about broken windows, and this is constituent services. And that is what this job is. We like to talk about all of the big policy initiatives that we all want to institute, and that's important. But if at the end of the day, my team and I are not providing excellent constituent services, answering the phone when it rings, solving problems, being responsive, being transparent, being excellent, then I'm failing as your council member. And so having a really excellent staff who understands how the city works, but also how the county and the state and the Fed work, because often you come in with a problem and the city's not the right person to solve it, but we'll figure out how to solve it on your behalf. And so constituent services is really important, and I'm committed to providing excellent constituent services. People have lost faith in government, and part of why that happens is because you call and no one answers, or no one calls you back, or if they do call you back, they don't fix it. And it's unacceptable. So constituent services is going to be a huge priority for me. I'm also on the transportation side and the access side. I'm an infrastructure geek by background. And I'm committed to building out a connected, protected bike network so that we can all safely get around our city, get out of our cars if we want to. The subway's not going to be coming through a huge chunk of Council District 5, a little further north, and you can't access it. So that first mile, last mile, to make it easy to get to the subway stations that are coming through CD5 is going to be a priority for me as well. I want to make it easier for people who choose to get out of their cars. That's everything from sidewalks that aren't cracked and crumbling. My son was riding a scooter down our street, and he fell and split his chin open and had 4 stitches. And it's a very common occurrence. People are falling on our sidewalks because our infrastructure is literally crumbling. And it's our job as council members to work with the city departments to bring those resources. And I'm going to be a pain in their butt and really demand that they provide the level of care and service that we're all paying for. And then finally, I'll just say, look, one of the first things I'll do on the council is ask the mayor to appoint me to the Metro Board, because I think we need environmentalists who have backgrounds in sustainability and infrastructure on the body of the largest transportation body in the country. And because I've worked in government at the county level, I understand where all the pots of money are that we can leverage, and we'll bring those resources to the 5th Council District to really accelerate the build out of all of this infrastructure. The way the budgets work, it's like this. The city's budget is small. Larger is the counties, then the states, then the feds. So we can't solve all the problems we're facing as a city unless we have people on the council who understand how to leverage up, because the budgets are so much bigger the further up you go. And I have that experience. I have a proven track record of bringing those dollars to the local level.
Jimmy, ladies and gentlemen.
So I see this question as two parts. The first about public transportation and the second about neighborhood services. To begin on public transportation, I think of it as a triangle: frequency, reliability, and safety. That's how you get people to believe in public transit, that they know it's going to come on time, that they know it's going to come often, and that they feel comfortable riding it. That triangle should be our North Star on transportation policy. To do that, we need to think about an interconnected transportation system. The heavy rail projects that are coming to Council District 5 are incredibly exciting, but they don't necessarily take you exactly where you need to go, because unless you live right along the line and unless you work right along the line. And that's why we have to think about heavy rail in conjunction with bus transportation, with bike transportation, and with a whole system-wide intervention that creates a really robust public transit network where people feel that it is a full-service transportation. The second point of the question about neighborhood services, I like to think about Michelle Wu, the newly elected mayor of Boston, who often says, how can people trust their cities to do the big if they can't take care of the small? And that's what the pothole represents. That's why it is the prototypical example of local government, because it's about trust. It's about public accountability. When people know that their potholes are going to be repaired, it creates a trusting relationship between elected officials and the people that has been so severely broken. And when you don't have that public accountability, it creates conditions rife for the kinds of corruption that we've seen endemic to LA city politics. If you think about street repairs run through 3 offices between the city. Bus shelters, there's a 16-step process to get a bus shelter implemented. The tree canopy that we see is run by various offices. These efforts where you can keep kicking the can down the road erodes any sense of accountability, where people know where to look, people know who to blame. So there's a streamlining that has to happen if we're ever going to have a neighborhood services model that people can actually sink their teeth into. We need an accountable, responsive, and trustworthy government. And then to your point about broken windows, the James Wilson and George Kelling theory about neighborhood disorder, the theory is right in that it identifies that small, seemingly insignificant elements of disorder or trash or an unwieldy civic life can make us feel unsafe. But it got the diagnosis wrong because it was exclusively about enforcement. It was about stopping and frisking people. It said that the way you curb disorder is by harsh enforcement of minor acts of disorder, and it was largely responsible for much of the mass incarceration that we've seen over the past 20 years. But it is the city's responsibility, it is the government's responsibility to be maintaining our public space against that disorder. When the government is in the business of creating well-paved and clean sidewalks, the people respond. That's broken windows done right, not the broken windows that we've seen in New York and other places, which has led to so much incarceration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jimmy. Scott?
Thank you for the question. It's very near and dear to my heart. Your question is really about how do we design and maintain our public space. My favorite place to canvass in all of Council District 5 is right here in Park Brea. Why is that the case? It's because traffic is calm. It's because we have street trees. I'm sure you all love living here too. It's an incredibly wonderful place to walk around. And one of my goals as your council member is to make sure the entire council district looks like that. There's no reason why it shouldn't. We have the resources to make sure that our streets are safe and complete and accessible for everyone. It is a failure of government. What does it say when our sidewalks are so impassable that somebody in a wheelchair can't use them? What does it say that we design our streets in a way that we don't feel like our kids are safe to roam? That's a statement of values. And we need to redesign our public realm in a way that is equitable, that is more democratic, and that supports community life, community gathering. So that's my vision. A lot of that has to do with transportation policy and also policy around parks and public space. And I've been doing a lot of work in this area. We need to make sure that the big projects are done right, things like the Purple Line, the Sepulveda Transit Corridor, the idea that we would have a valley to the West Side Line that doesn't even include a stop at UCLA is pretty silly. So we need a council member that's going to fight to do these things right. The other things that we need to do are build a low-stress bikeway system through our city. That means bike paths and robustly traffic calm streets that are safe for my daughter to ride on, or a senior citizen to ride on, anyone from age 8 to 80. We also need much better low-cost transit infrastructure for our bus system, which is the workhorse of Metro Los Angeles. So that looks like dedicated busways where it makes sense. It looks like all-door boarding, real-time arrival information, expanded bus waiting areas, shade for bus stops. The infrastructure is super lacking, and we need to make that experience of taking transit pleasurable, safe, and efficient if we're going to get folks out of their cars. The other thing that I will say is all Angelenos deserve access to the kind of park space that we have right here in Park La Brea. I will be a champion for expanding our park system in Los Angeles.
Mid-City has a high concentration of multifamily housing, Park La Brea being one of them, and often limited and unsafe parking. Renters experienced mass inequities in advertised versus contracted rental rates throughout the pandemic, and lack of renter repair and services. Residents of Park La Brea have been receiving eviction notices this spring despite the ban. How will you advocate and achieve renters' rights, and which issues around renters' rights drive your platform? Katie, you'll take this one first.
So I have an interesting perspective on this issue. I'm both a renter of a duplex not far from here, and my husband and I are the proverbial mom and pop landlords. We own a duplex that we rent out. So I know what it feels like to own and need to make repairs, sometimes very expensive ones, and also how important it is to have robust tenants' rights. And perhaps that balanced approach is why I'm being attacked by the California Apartment Owners Association in a very big way right now. I won't go into that, but happy to later. So I support rent control. I think rent control is really important because it provides stability for the largest piece of our household budget, right? So many of us pay more than half of our total income towards rent. And I think it's really important that that piece of our budget is stable, something that we can predict going forward year over year. So I support rent control. And I think we should expand it to include not just stuff built a long time ago, but over time roll in newer stuff as well, thoughtfully, so that we don't disincentivize new housing. But we should all have stability. People who own their own home have a mortgage and it's fixed over a period of 30 years. Renters should have that as well. I support tenant protections and eviction proceedings. I think that we should have access to counsel in eviction proceedings. So there's a whole suite of tenant protections that I support and I'm fully on board with. Is that the full question? Okay.
Thank you. Jimmy?
So as I talked about in my opening statement, a childhood eviction shattered our family. It disrupted the course of our life and shaped my trajectory for 2 decades in the aftermath. And I take that very seriously. It informs my approach to politics and inequality, and I'm running to ensure that no Angeleno has to experience that or anything even close to it. And if I win, I would be the only real full renter, sorry Katie, on city council, 1 out of 15 in a city that is 65% plus renters. To give you a sense of political power, when 0 out of 15 elected officials at our municipal government, they don't represent the economic reality of the vast majority of Angelenos, and that's as true in Council District 5 as it is anywhere, where nearly 70% of Angelenos rent. And I think that class representation really matters for a body that has so much control over people's housing and development in our city. So in terms of specific policies, it begins with identifying people who are living on the financial brink. That's about engaging with a variety of social service agencies that folks are accessing, using LUSD, which is often the first line of service provider for Angelino families. And it's about subsidizing those folks. It's about recognizing that the gulf between housing costs and wages has become so huge and untethered that there are folks at the bottom end of the income distribution that to stay housed are going to need government assistance. And that's a reality. It is so much more expensive to have those people fall into homelessness than a small subsidy to keep them housed. San Francisco has had tremendous success with small scale rent subsidies and transfers. I'm a firm supporter in a firm believer in rent control. Right to counsel is great. It's small potatoes at the end of the day, because the first and foremost reason people get evicted is because they cannot pay their rent. What a right to counsel guarantees you is a lawyer who will pull at the frayed edges of housing law, but it doesn't get to the root cause of why people are getting evicted. And the reason is because they can't afford housing. If we don't act to stabilize rents and increase the supply of affordable housing, building out a housing production system that is naturally producing housing that real people can actually afford, inequality is just going to get worse and worse in our city. Evictions are going to become a lived experience of more and more people that we know and include up to and including ourselves. On the maintenance piece, what I think is so essential, because nothing makes people feel more vulnerable than not having a well-maintained apartment. It's about force and it's about funding. It's about funding the inspection agencies, and it's about having a forceful housing champion on the side of renters day in and day out who is going to do that work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Scott?
So I'll finish what I was mentioning in my opening, which is that I have lived this housing crisis. Before we moved to Carthay Square, we lived in the smallest two-bedroom in all of Council District 5, 600 square feet, and it was falling apart with all the problems that you could ever imagine, mold, pests. How much power did we have as renters to compel these unscrupulous landlords to make the basic changes for suitable living? Very little. We need to change that, and we need a champion for renters at City Council. One piece is a fully funded right to counsel. We have an anti-harassment ordinance in this city, but it has no teeth, because the fines that can be exacted directly by the city can be absorbed by these huge landlords as the cost of business. We need public representation of tenants. And we also need to take the power away from these landlords. The reason that they have all this power is because we renters are desperate for housing. For affordable housing. We need to build more housing that doesn't displace folks and take that power away from landlords. I'm proud to have the support of Abundant Housing Los Angeles, who is imagining a future where we can all afford to live in Los Angeles. The other thing that I will say, as you're evaluating this field, the California Apartments Association has spent over $500,000 supporting Sam and attacking another candidate. One of the most important rules in politics is follow the money. Why do you think that's going to be the case, that they're spending all of that money on Sam? He is not going to be your champion at City Hall. You need somebody that has the lived experience and the comprehensive platform on housing affordability and protection. That's me. I would be honored to have your support.
Sam, I would like to give you 30 seconds to respond specifically to Scott's statements, and then we'll restart the time for your standard response.
Thank you, I appreciate that. You know the line about assumptions, right? You know when it makes someone up, right? So people are supporting me because they like my ideas, which include keeping neighborhoods safe. The only candidate on day one who said, we need more police officers. People are supporting me because they like my ideas on helping people who are unhoused get the mental health and shelter that they need. Only candidate on day one who said, I will use our anti-camping ordinance to save the lives of people who are dying in our streets and parks. So you can take up your question to whoever's funding me on their own, why they're supporting me, but I can tell you I've been consistent with my views on day one. I say the same thing to everyone, and it's resonating because you know what? Things aren't working. I'm not from a political dynasty, I don't have a famous last name, and I'm just fed up like all of you. We deserve a better Los Angeles that's safe, affordable, and vibrant. The same Los Angeles that welcomed my refugee family 4 years ago when we had nothing but 2 suitcases. In terms of renter protections and tenant protections, there's a lot of talk in this room about what people want to do, what people think should be done about these ideas. But I spent the last decade of my life as a board member with Betsedic Legal Services, one of the most proactive and acclaimed tenants' rights organizations in the country, so much so that I was honored by Betsedic in 2015 for my leadership and work with Eric Holder. I've represented tenants pro bono. I have fought against slumlords in the city. There's a case that came to mind several years ago where I represented a disabled single mother in Santa Monica who wanted to put a Ring doorbell when those things were becoming more prominent. Now they're everywhere, right? She put it outside of her home because her bicycle was being stolen, because there was prostitution happening in a tough part of Santa Monica, and her slumlord landlady gave her a 3-day notice saying that's an unlawful alteration, violation of your breach of your lease. Take it down or we will evict you. I came in, sprung into action. We had a press conference. We sent a letter. We threatened to sue her. She backed down, and Ring Doorbell used that victory as precedent. I'm proud of my work on behalf of tenants. I will continue to fight for tenants. I've told you some ideas, more rent subsidies. Section 8 needs to be scaled. 1 out of 10 people who qualify for Section 8 get it, and there's not enough units for them. And there's a lot more too. People talk about affordability of housing. That's a big issue too. But landlords have other duties. Their units have to be habitable, right? They have to be clean. They can't be filthy. We got to make sure we hold landlords accountable on that issue. We have to make sure units are safe, just like I did in Santa Monica with that tenant. Landlords have duties to make sure they're safe. Their safety, and whether the use of technology or security, landlords have to protect their tenants. They have a legal duty to do so, and I will fight as a council member like hell. Whether you're an owner or renter, young, old, any background, we all deserve to feel safe in the city, and that's exactly what I intend to do. There's a lot of other issues too, right? Affordable housing. There's a lot of housing that's getting built that's going to destroy naturally occurring rent-controlled units, right? No one talks about that. There's a 4-unit or 8-unit that gets knocked down, and 40 units comes up with 2 or 3 or 4 that's going to be affordable. They're set aside, but no one's making sure that low-income Angelinos are getting those affordable units. There's no public registry, there's no accountability, there's no enforcement, there's no auditing. That's the job of the council member. I'm going to fight tooth and nail. I'm a litigator by training. I will go to war to make sure that people are not made homeless because landlords are doing the wrong thing.
Thank you, Sam. As residents of the second largest city in the United States and a coastal community, the climate crisis is paramount. We're reliant on the State Water Project and water imported from Owens Valley. The aqueduct system is now over 100 years old. The city is experiencing the 35th driest spring in recent record, further fueling our drought and worsening fire conditions. How will you guide the council to address green initiatives, including water reclamation and access, as well as increased access to non-fossil fuel reliant sources such as EV charging infrastructure specifically for renters? For this question, we're going to go back to Jimmy.
Thank you so much for the question. So Los Angeles is by far 2 largest contributors to carbon emissions and thereby climate change are cars on the road and suburban sprawl, the carbon that it takes to build out further and further and further, and the commutes that accompany that development so far out of the urban center when you have people commuting from Palmdale and Lancaster to the job centers of Council District 5. So to frame this question, I think it is so important that we think about housing and climate and transportation as deeply interconnected at the municipal level. Because for what City Council can do, the powers of that branch of government, getting cars off the road by investing in public transit and building out a housing production system that is tethered to new investments in transit, that is the greatest contribution that Los Angeles could make to reducing our city's carbon footprint. My plan prioritizes development 2 to 3 stories along underutilized commercial transit corridors. Streets like Robertson, La Cienega, 3rd, and Melrose, places that are primed for bus lanes that go up and down, for 2 to 3 stories of housing that enable folks to walk to businesses. All of the streets I mentioned having unusually high vacancy rates, expanding sidewalks, putting in tree canopies, and creating wonderful, vibrant, complete streets that are much more environmentally friendly and that give more people the opportunity to live comfortable, affordable lives within the high opportunity areas of Council District 5. That, to me, is a pivotal climate intervention. We may think of it as a housing or transit intervention, but in reality, it is actually the biggest thing that our city could do on the climate front as well. Additional ideas: 1, banning urban oil drilling, making sure that existing inspection ordinances are enforced as we work to phase out and ensure that that phase out actually happens. We've seen promise after promise on the oil drilling piece not materialize in actuality. Additionally, the Department of Water and Power, LA is lucky to control our own municipal utility. Other cities aren't in control of their resources in the way that Los Angeles is. And there are wonderful pilot programs, electrification programs that help folks, especially low-income folks, transition from gas appliances to electric appliances. Subsidies for renters to help, and small landlords to help decarbonize buildings and to weatherize buildings. These are small-scale pilot programs that have been incredibly successful. Scaling up those programs to meet the urgency of the global climate crisis is another huge step that the city could do to transition us to 100% renewable energy by the city's goal of 2050, and many experts believe even sooner if we do all of this. Last piece, I think we have to be very strategic on the fire dimension about where we focus development. Those corridors are a much better and more fire-resistant arena than development in the hillside communities. Thank you very much.
Scott?
So what does the International Panel on Climate Change basically tell us about how we shift this crisis? 2 main things I would boil it down to. 1, we need to get to 100% clean, renewable energy as soon as possible. And number 2, we need to transform our built environment and our lifestyles to be carbon zero. So how do we do that locally? On clean energy, we have a goal in the city to get to 100% by 2035. It can be done. A robust study suggests that it can. But now we actually have to do the work. And we need to use our scarce resources to stop things like widening freeways, which increases carbon emissions, and smart expenditures on things like weatherizing homes, investing in solar energy, and so much more. On the lifestyle and built environment side, we need to build more affordable housing in the 5th district. Berkeley's study shows that in nearly every zip code in the district, other than the hillsides, infill housing is the most powerful thing you can do on climate change. And then we have to transform our transportation sector, which is the largest emitting sector in the state, towards a multimodal system: biking, walking, transit. Still, people will be driving, but we need to replace as many of those trips with other forms of transportation as we can. And then you mentioned water as well, which is related and very important. There is so much opportunity to capture and clean our water right here in the 5th district. We need to be looking at our public space. We have Measure W, but not much of that money is actually coming to the 5th district. Partially that's a good thing because low-income black and brown communities are getting a lot of that money. We need to be smart and strategic about how we create projects. So we need to look at our schools, our streets, our parks. All of those locations are places where we can start to infiltrate more water and clean it before it gets out to our oceans. And at the same time, if we're smart, we can be transforming those spaces for them to be more equitable. For example, we could be transforming Melrose Avenue into a complete street with the first protected curb-level bike path in the city. I champion a project called Uplift Melrose, which would do exactly that. And at the same time, we can include new street trees and bioswales so we can be cleaning that urban runoff as it comes off the street. We can do a lot of things at the same time. That's a way to get multiple benefits and to use our scarce resources wisely.
Sam?
So we know as policymakers that every decision we make must be made with a climate lens, right? To make sure that our planet exists for our kids and our grandkids. And there's a lot of big issues. Obviously, we mentioned water. The roadmap is there. We have to do a lot more on stormwater capture and reusing groundwater, gray water, wastewater. But one area where we're not doing enough is electrification. And Los Angeles really should be a world leader. We have to accelerate our permanent transition to electrification. You mentioned the charging infrastructure. We're woefully inadequate given where we need to be. We know the future is EV cars, and we need to have these charging stations everywhere, in every new building, in every big public space, in every big venue in the city. I want to see these superchargers happen. The city should ease and streamline the process for solar, for residential. We have to decentralize it. We have to improve how we distribute it and store it as well. Of course, we got to get people out of their cars, right? And that means building more housing near transit. That means more incentives where people can work from home. That's a big part of this in the future as well. And something I'm really passionate about is our urban canopy and our parks. As far as big cities go, we don't have significant parkland, and there's some ideas, some folks out there who want to turn more of our park space and green space into housing. That's not where housing should go. It should go on the commercial corridors. We need to expand our parks. We need more pocket parks. We need to build more trees, add more trees throughout Los Angeles. It's going to clean the air, cool the air, provide shade, enhance our quality of life. That's an imperative as well, and it's a great use of our tax dollars to plant these trees. And how many of us actually know that the city will give you a free tree to plant if you're an owner, and we need to make sure that more folks and more neighborhoods and more organizations will have the opportunity to plant these. And better education, right? We know that June 1, there's new water usage rules too. This is about community working in partnership with government, with nonprofits to make sure that this planet is clean and vibrant and healthy for all of us. And then we can create great local jobs at a time when the economy is struggling, as we imagine what the future of Los Angeles should be. And I'm really excited to lead that. And then on the oil well issue, Jimmy mentioned making sure that we enforce our inspection ordinance. We actually don't have an inspection ordinance in the city of Los Angeles. The residents, for example, in the Rancho Cheviot community sued the city in 1999 as part of a 2001 settlement agreement. The city of LA promised secret reviews every 5 years and to come up with an inspection ordinance. And it's at the desk of our city attorney. It actually has not been implemented yet, despite the city council approving it. We have to get an inspection ordinance in place. We have to inspect our oil and gas wells. We need to monitor them better. We have to shut down the wells long term, but in the short term, we have to plug orphan wells and make sure there's money in remediation and bonding bank accounts. God forbid there's another accident. And just December of 2021, there was a small oil spill at Pico and Doheny, believe it or not. So this is an issue that's really ripe. The 5th District has more oil and gas wells than any other district in Los Angeles. So this is a clear and present threat to our safety.
Thank you, Sam. Katie?
So part of why I'm running for this seat is because I recognized a couple of years ago that with Mayor Garcetti leaving, there wasn't going to be a climate champion at the city of Los Angeles. His sustainability plan that actually has been moving the needle and a lot of efforts across the board, from water to energy to park space and environmental justice, isn't actually codified in law anywhere. And so the next mayor can do what he or she wants with it. And so I think having champions who are deeply grounded and experienced in this area is really important, because environmental policymaking isn't just about the environment. It's about people, it's about public health, it's about equity, it's about making communities that we actually want to live in, where we can thrive as it continues to get warmer and drier. So I want to talk about just a couple of areas. We could spend obviously more than 3 minutes on this. Water was the animating question. We are now in drought. We're going to be in drought basically forever. And so what we need to do is transition away from imported water. We get our water from very far away. Measure W is all about starting to make our region more water and climate resilient by capturing stormwater, reusing, recycling water, and doing it in a way that also created parks and open space and tree canopy. And so it's starting to do that. And I'm committed to bringing those resources and funds to the 5th Council District. So it's $300 million every single year in perpetuity for local climate resiliency projects, parks, open space, stormwater capture. I'm uniquely suited to do that because I created the program. That's water. 2, we need to electrify and decarbonize the grid. DWP is the largest municipal utility in the country. It's an incredible opportunity for us to create thousands of good paying union jobs while we transition our energy system so that it's resilient and reliable. When you turn on the lights, when you turn on the faucet, water needs to come out, the power needs to come on, and it should be decarbonized. Oil drilling. One of the last things I did before I went on leave in September, we partnered with Supervisor Holly Mitchell's office to start the process of phasing out oil wells and oil drilling, existing wells and new wells in unincorporated LA County. The city of LA is lagging behind. I'm committed to leading that charge at the city in a way that brings the workers doing the work to the table to make sure that no one's left behind. I'm committed to both. 4, we need smarter land use planning. At the beginning of my career after graduating from UCLA Law School, I was a land use attorney. And I think the best way, to Scott and Jimmy's point, the best way we can reduce our emissions and create truly healthy green communities is through smarter land use planning. So I'm committed to updating the community plans in partnership with communities where we decide together where we're going to put that affordable and workforce housing. We have the largest job centers outside of downtown LA. We should be putting the housing there. And near our transportation that people who live in the housing are actually going to use. Finally, I just want to say something about schools and the opportunity that schools provide. So schools are shut down usually on the weekends, but if we enter into partnerships with schools and school districts, we can transform schools into parks and community hubs. And with Measure W is actually intended to really leverage those sites. Every neighborhood has one within walking distance, and there's a huge opportunity to green our neighborhoods, provide a place for us to go on the weekends and after school. Every neighborhood should have a school and a park within walking distance.
All right, our last question. New development is clearly on the rise across the city, but we are in a chronic housing shortage cycle. The State Department of Housing and Community Development has stated that Los Angeles is not complying with the mandated quota for zoning enough land for housing. We are at least 250,000 units short across the city. Gentrification is pushing low-income renters out of their homes, and new build developers have overpriced units. How will you guide the council to improve the use of housing subsidies, and which policies would you push to impose on developers to increase the amount of affordable housing units, specifically for mid-city residents? Scott.
Thank you for the question. So I'm very proud of my record on this issue. I oversaw a lot of land use for 9 years on the chair as the chair of 7 years as the chair of Mid City West, 9 years as a board member, and I was proud to vote many times for displacement-free, mixed-income, mixed-use housing on our boulevards, and I was proud to vote to oppose projects that would displace individuals. We need to build more housing in this town, and we need to do it in smart ways. Our commercial boulevards offer one good opportunity. We have the Transit-Oriented Communities program, which is actually producing more below market rate units than any other program in the city right now, more than federally funded low-income housing. That program will sunset into the community plan, so it's really essential that we have good, smart leadership at the city council that can drive a robust engagement process and make sure the incentives are right when we adopt new community plans, and that we can leverage as many below market rate units as possible. So that's one piece. Another piece is social housing, which we need to start doing in California and right here in Los Angeles. One model that I think would be very effective would be nonprofit and public acquisition of existing rent-stabilized properties, some of which are not well maintained. So it's a good solution for solving a couple problems at the same time. One, we could acquire those properties and offer them at a variety of income levels, some for very low income, some for low income, and some maybe at market rates. And at the same time, we could bring them up to code, which would be an environmental win, right? Electrifying those buildings, and also a win for the renters who are often living in poorly maintained housing. So those are a couple of the things that I'm really excited to lead on. There is a call now also for a 100% affordability overlay zone, which is a policy being used in a number of cities, and I think that could be really effective because it would streamline the process for creating 100% affordable housing, which often, includes a lot of the same roadblocks that market rate housing experiences. And in housing production, time is money. So if we're slowing down the process of creating 100% affordable housing that we, the public, are paying for, it's gonna, we're not gonna get as much bang for our buck. That's a huge problem. We need to streamline these projects, get them in the ground as
15
fast
seconds.
as possible so that we can serve our low-income families.
Sam?
So what affordable housing developers will tell you is it's just not affordable to build affordable housing in the city of Los Angeles. Unlike other cities where they prioritize and streamline the workforce and affordable housing like Carson or Culver City, in Los Angeles, workforce and affordable housing languish behind luxury projects, right? And I saw this firsthand as on the board of this nonprofit that's building housing for adults with special needs. It took us nearly 3 years to get inspections done and permits and plan check. And what that causes is the costs of the project to just continue to climb and climb. So we know that we can't control the cost of materials and labor and to some extent land. What we do control is time. So for more affordable housing projects or workforce housing projects, we have to bring these to the front of the line. We have to hire more planners. We have to see and incentivize more housing on the big corridors. There's no reason why Pico and Olympic have these 1-story, 2-story buildings up and down Westwood, La Brea, Beverly. It's time to see more mixed-use housing. It's going to improve and invigorate the neighborhoods as well with ground floor retail and pedestrian friendly. We're going to add trees, improve the sidewalks. That's the kind of Los Angeles I think all of us want. I'm going to make sure we bring that investment and make it easier to actually build those projects. At the same time, we have to be very careful about displacement. Right? We don't want to eliminate naturally occurring rent-controlled and affordable housing units and without any guarantee that people who are low income are able to access those units. That's a key part of this. And the other aspect about housing is we talked about the cost of housing, but we can be really innovative right now. What other cities are doing is using more innovative approaches to housing. Some of the materials can be both purchased, or we can use modular housing to bring down the cost way down. And that's something that will be a priority for me, is to see what other cities are doing and require our city planning department to move projects along on very strict timelines. I'm going to have my planning team in my office work really urgently to move projects that are affordable workforce to the front of the line, and because that's really where the need is. We have to build more affordable workforce housing, especially in the mid-city area.
Thank you. So, updating our community plans, which has already been talked about, is really important because it gives us a chance to put the right housing in the right places. And we don't lack market rate housing in Council District 5. We lack affordable and we lack workforce. And we lack it in the right places. And so it's really important that as we update our community plans, we are specific and clear about what additional density is going to be allowed and what it's going to be targeted toward. I'd like to live in a district where the teachers who work in schools in Council District 5 can actually afford to live in Council District 5. Or the nurses and physician's assistants who work at Cedars can afford to live near Cedars. We have some of the worst traffic in the country on the west side. And there's been this long time fallacy that all development leads to more traffic. But I know, and I'm sure you probably know too, that when you put the right development in the right places, the right uses in the right places, you can actually reduce traffic. And so updating our community plans together to put affordable and workforce housing near our job centers, near our transportation hubs, we can build the housing that we need. We can incentivize it. And look, there's a ton of money right now at the state and federal level for affordable housing. And I'm committed to bringing those dollars to projects and buying down affordability. So if a project developer wants to come in with 10% affordable, we're going to help work with him to bring additional resources. So instead it's 50% affordable or 60% affordable. And maybe we work out a deal where rent control applies and they agree to pilot something like that. And I've had some conversations with developers who are open to that if we bring the resources. So I think there's a lot of interesting ways we can create affordability because there's so much money right now at the state and federal level. The other thing we haven't talked about yet is ownership. And it shouldn't just be that rich people should be able to eventually own their own place. And so pathways to ownership instead of just renting are really important, because that's how you build intergenerational wealth, something you can pass on to your kids. And there are other places that have figured out how to do this, and I'm committed to doing that here too. I think ownership at all levels of affordability should be something that we commit to as a city. It's going to be how we make Los Angeles more equitable for everybody. What else can I say? Displacement. We have to make sure that as we're building denser, we're accounting for the folks who would otherwise be displaced. And that doesn't mean we should say no to all projects. It just means we need to be thoughtful about how we treat the people who are moving, a right of return, helping make sure they have a place to go, or if it's untenable, then the development isn't appropriate. And I opposed a big hotel project on Robertson because it would have displaced longtime tenants in a rent-stabilized building, and I know others on here did as well. And I think being thoughtful about what goes in where and what we do to make sure that people aren't losing their homes in the name of some version of progress.
Jim.
So this question is ultimately about our housing production system. And I want to leave you with a statistic. The council district that produced the most affordable housing, that's government subsidized housing at a lower cost, was Council District 1, Councilmember Gil Cedillo. And in his 8-year tenure, they built 2,000 units of affordable housing. And it's on his mailers, 2,000 units of affordable housing. The RENA allocations that you described in the question put Los Angeles City at 500,000 units short of housing. So the council district that's doing the best is building 2,000 in a 500,000 shortage. We're never going to get out of this crisis by streamlining alone. There is no amount of streamlining that gets you from 2,000 to 500,000. We have to be focused on building out a housing production system that is naturally producing the kinds of housing that we need. Real housing for real people with jobs in Council District 5 who deserve to live in close proximity to those jobs. So to begin, that project starts with catalyzing smaller scale development built mostly by mom and pop builders in lower costs to build lower cost units in highly desirable areas, especially the commercial transit corridors of Council District 5 that have been long discussed. Along those corridors is the only way that we can get the scale of housing that we need with the urgency that this crisis demands. And as importantly, it is the only way to stall gentrification, because when folks get priced out of Council District 5, they move to historic communities of color in South LA and East LA, and then folks in those neighborhoods get priced out and move to Palmdale and Lancaster and eventually out of state. And that's the process. So stalling and curtailing gentrification, anti-displacement initiatives for folks in Council District 5, as well as throughout Los Angeles, starts on those corridors, because it's the only way we can get the number of units that this crisis actually demands. To make sure that happens, though, it requires people with courage and bravery to push back on anti-housing forces within Council District 5 that cling hard to a vision of Los Angeles that is exclusively for single-family homeowners. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but this is a city of predominantly renters. And when you have political power so concentrated solely in homeowners, it upsets the balance of how political power should operate. Additional policy goals are fighting tooth and nail for every affordable housing dollar and voucher from the federal government and the state government, but recognizing that those affordability dollars are necessary but by no means sufficient, because we will never get out of this crisis 10 units here and 10 units there. It's about our housing production system. Thank you.
All right. Neighbors, we would like to give you all the opportunity to ask questions. Candidates, I would like to remind you that we're going to limit ourselves to 30 seconds on these questions. And neighbors, I'm going to ask you to please ask one question at a time so that we can hear from many voices. And do we have a question? Please. Great, let's get one of yours first and I'll come back to you. That sounds wonderful.
First of all, Jimmy.
Yeah.
No, not Jimmy, the next one.
Scott.
First of all, I'm gonna ask their names. Is that 4 questions?
I think you got a freebie on that one.
Scott,
Yes, yes, ma'am.
you said something about condemning buildings,
Condemning buildings?
or taking over buildings that are not up to code.
Yeah, I was talking about one.
That's what I wanna know. What are you talking about?
So, many of the cities across the world that I think have done the best job with making things affordable have public investment in the housing market. They have social housing or public housing.
Yeah.
I believe that one model that would work very well for Los Angeles would be if we can use public dollars to buy rent-stabilized housing many of those properties are not well maintained.
Is this like eminent domain?
No, I'm not talking about eminent domain. I'm talking about acquisition. So we would use public and nonprofit dollars, and perhaps some federal and state dollars would be included in that to buy buildings from the private markets, get them up to code, and then they can be offered at a variety of income levels.
And then who's gonna run them?
Well, there's different. We have to have that discussion. I mean, this is
That's the next piece of it.
yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna stop now, and then I'm gonna ask the next one.
Okay. Toby?
Yes, hi, thank you all for coming. Very interesting answering your responses to all the topics. My question is on crime. So you talked a lot about how to prevent it, but once it's committed, I'm wondering if the penalties are severe enough that, for the crime. For instance, in San Francisco, anything under $1,000 that's stolen is a misdemeanor. They're just having rampant. There's no consequences to the criminals. I don't know exactly what they are here, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about the penalties and if they should be stricter for the criminals.
Thank you, Toby. Let me guide the panel. Sam, you're going to start this one first, please.
Thank you for the question, Toby. I think you're referring to Prop 47, which reduced non-violent property crime under $950 to a misdemeanor. I think there's some unintended consequences. It passed with overwhelming support because they were supposed to make an investment in schools away from jails and incarceration. I think we all want alternatives to incarceration, but I think some criminals are taking advantage of this, and we have to get criminal justice reform right, just because some crimes do require incarceration, and I think as a city and as a state, we have to revisit some of the unintended consequences of Prop 47.
Katie?
When we don't prosecute crimes, no matter what the crime is, sometimes people feel emboldened to keep doing it. I support alternatives to incarceration in cases of misdemeanors. But if you do something over and over and over again, at some point it should cumulatively add up. Part of what we did at the county was really create a robust alternatives program where you provide people other options. That costs money, and we need to do more of it, and we need to accelerate the build out of the alternatives to incarceration. People need jobs and job opportunities, and at some point we need to actually hold people accountable. And that doesn't always mean jail, but sometimes if someone keeps doing something enough, maybe it does, maybe it's probation, maybe it's something in between.
Jimmy?
Thank you so much for the question. I think that what law is a display of our social values. It says these are the values that we hold, and when people deviate from those values, there should be consequences and accountability. And that's the baseline of what a legal system is meant to do. And when you have repeat property crime or break-ins or whatnot, we by no means have sufficient accountability for those grievances. And we haven't built out all of the tools of what that accountability could look like. We basically have incarceration or pay the money back, or both. That's what we have. Real accountability could look so much more creative, right? It could be real engagement, it could be teaching, it could be partial sentence reduction for long-term commitment to retribution of various forms. It could be restorative justice. There's so many successful tools of accountability that I think are stronger than solely relying on a deterrence theory of crime, because we know that deterrence, the punishment for a crime, hits a limit on how much it actually impacts behavior. We know that in Texas and Florida, anything under $2,500 is a misdemeanor. So it's not exactly a one-to-one relationship.
Thank you. Scott?
I appreciate Jimmy's response on this. Look, there's a tension here, right? Because we don't want to incentivize crime, but at the same time, we know that our incarceration system can create problems for folks. You know, can really make things even worse for a lot of people that are in contact with the criminal justice system. And so I think we need to be very careful and data-based and research-based on how we make these decisions. And I would want to look on evidence on, you know, what is that sweet spot? Because, you know, we don't want to be giving folks that have troubled backgrounds more and more experience with the criminal justice system and incarceration, because that can just bake things even further. So I appreciate your concern. I think we need to be very careful.
Thank you. We had a question here in the page.
Hi, my name is Madison. I'm wearing my mask. I hope you can hear me. I want to speak to Sam because when I was young in my 20s, I was on the receiving end of that addiction. And I really appreciate you bringing to light the destruction of older buildings and arguing this rent control going down for the McMansions. But my question is actually about the homeless. All of you spoke about the homeless, which I think is the pivotal point or a big part of today. And I was wondering, what do you do with the homeless part of the population that does not want to leave the streets?
We'll have Sam start first since he was invoked, but I'd like everybody to have a chance to respond.
So I appreciate that question, because this is really the hardest aspect of the street engagement, right? Is that for example, there was just a outreach effort on Sepulveda between Santa Monica and Wilshire. There's 25 folks who are living in an encampment, and 2 said yes to shelter. The other 23 said no. And there's different reasons, right? There are folks who are making a rational decision who they prefer living outside, and we have to create safe environments for them to do that. Safe camping is this idea. I don't think it should be next to homes and schools or parks, but we can find ways for that to happen safely and connect them with job training and mental health services and addiction services if appropriate. There's also a population who is not making rational choices, right? If someone who is, my wife and I were driving on the way here, we saw someone who was half naked waving a hammer next to the Beverly Center. And we're like, that person probably will say no to an offer of shelter or housing, right? Maybe, but is that person really, does that person need more, right? We can't build our way out of it, we can't arrest our way out of it. That person will need significant mental health services, and for that I talked about earlier, change our mental health laws, more investment in beds and facilities, and that's really where my priority is, the mental health aspects of the homelessness crisis.
Thank you so much. Katie?
So the reason why we need to pair enforcement against encampments with deep street engagement is because when you do deep street engagement, you have the right people who are social workers with a background in this, doing the work every day, the same people going out and talking to folks and figuring out who they are, what they need, what will work for them. And then, this is key, actually having those places for them to go to that are flexible and meet their needs. Because right now we don't have enough of those places. Some people work at night. Some people are very mentally ill and won't choose to go no matter what. Some people have a dog and the shelter, the tiny home doesn't take dogs. So we need to be as flexible as we possibly can when we create this housing. We need to actually create it, and then we need to do the work of partnering with unhoused people to figure out what they need. And then some people are just going to say no. because they're very mentally ill and or they're very addicted. And so we need more tools available to us to help get people into housing. And we need mental health and addiction beds. We simply do not have places for people who are very sick to go to get the help they need. And we need some changes in state law, I think, thoughtfully done to help get very mentally ill people into that. Because right now, all we have is a 72-hour hold or a very cumbersome, lengthy legal process that usually doesn't happen. And so there's not a lot of flexibility and there's not a lot of tools. And so flexible housing, better mental health tools, mental health beds.
Jimmy?
Madison, was it? Thank you for the question and for sharing your eviction story with us and for noting about the apartment owners and developers who are looking to take affordable units offline. To answer your question, I'd like to flip the script just a little bit because I think it can seem like the majority of the unhoused population doesn't want services, when in reality, the vast majority do. And to Sam's point about the two folks on Wilshire and Santa Monica who accepted services and the others who didn't, we always have to be attuned to what that offer was. And we know that in the midst of COVID, congregate shelters are a non-ideal living situation. They're short-term, they're unpleasant for staff, and unpleasant for residents. So unless we're working to build out systems that are approaching a place that you or I would feel comfortable living, I understand why folks would want to go. And the number of people who, with a slate of fully staffed and funded resources with mental health, with a dignified and private, real shelter that is permanent and ongoing rather than a few days here or a few days there, that are actually so deeply resistant that they won't accept a roof over their heads, I think it's an incredibly small population.
Okay.
And it shouldn't be the focus of our conversation. It should be the last piece after we build out the rest.
Thank you. Scott?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, the RAND Corporation actually just did a study on this. I used to work there. And they found that the majority of folks that they surveyed were eager to have some kind of housing, would accept. The problem is that so many of the offers are not valid for folks. Maybe they're congregate, they don't offer the privacy and dignity that folks need, or they don't accept pets, and some folks, like their pet is the only thing that's helped them survive on the street. And so we put all these roadblocks against people. So we really need that supply of a variety of options that offer people privacy and dignity. And then there is a population that is particularly resistant. One of the things that I will say is if we can help all of the other people, this smaller population becomes much easier to manage. And it's true that we will need robust engagement with those folks and also mental health beds and mental health services. And so there's a lot of tools that we need, but we can solve this problem. It's been done around the world, and we can get to ending homelessness.
Thank you. In the black?
So I heard that 3 of you have proposed increasing the police budget, and it wasn't super clear in your answers which is which, but Mayor Garcia last year approved a 12% increase in the LAPD, and crime has still gone up. Either the police is reallocating their resources insufficiently, incorrectly to militarize themselves and terrorize communities of color, or they're going to continue throwing money at the problem. I would like to hear your arguments for either side.
Thank you. Let's start with Katie.
It's really hard to know what's happening with that money. And until we move officers away from doing the things that they shouldn't be doing, that all of us probably agree they shouldn't be doing, which is non-emergency mental health calls, homeless calls, it's very hard to know how much more money we need to throw at it. I think when we free up officers to do the work of crime suppression and solving crimes, we'll have a much better sense of how much more they need. And I know it's 30 seconds, right? I'll just end by saying, I believe that the department itself needs to be reformed in ways that it itself, in the wake of the George Floyd protests in the summer of 2020, they agreed they needed to be reformed. And if that costs money, I'm okay with that. I would like to see an accountable, reformed police department where officers are doing the work that they went to the academy to do. If that costs a little more, then okay. But I don't, We need some more officers perhaps. I don't know what that number is. I don't think we'll really know until we have them doing the work that they're supposed to be doing.
Jimmy?
I can't seem to figure out the
Timing. Thank you so much for the question. It's one we've never been asked in 30-odd debates so far. I hear your point, and I think it goes to the fact that the correlation between police spending and safety is attenuated and nonlinear. And the idea that more money to the police department equates to more safety, always, in all contexts, in all cities, has just not been shown to be true. There are too many models of city after city, be it Sacramento with the aggressive, tough-on-crime prosecutor who's now running for state attorney general, where crime rates have skyrocketed in Sacramento under her leadership. So I hear you, and I see that deep frustration. And when I think about reforms, I think about both and, police and. What social institutions can we be building out? Homeless engagement, mental health first responders that are better equipped for doing so much of the work that police are doing, rather than more money for implicit bias training or efforts that fortify the police with more resources toward very little and at best attenuated gains in public safety.
Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, so if you look across to peer cities, it's very instructive. New York City is a much safer city and spends a much smaller proportion of their budget on policing. And so I believe, and I think the evidence suggests this is the case, we are going to become a safer city if we disinvest over time in policing that doesn't work, right? I mean, we all agree on all of this, a lot of these things actually. So it's confusing that we have calls for, just blanket hiring of cops. We know that that our streets are incredibly unsafe and that we're spending millions and millions of dollars responding to traffic collisions. What if we just made the streets safe instead? We know that the police are unable to deal with mental health episodes. What if we fund mental health professionals instead? All of those things would have the function of reducing the amount of money we spend on policing. And that would make us safer because then we can use the rest of our dollars on the things that actually matter in terms of policing, like crime reduction, like community policing.
Thank you,
I'm
Scott.
here for that work.
Sam?
So we know that crime is up due to a lot of factors, right? Increase of guns on the streets, a sense of lawlessness and fewer consequences for certain crimes, and so forth, an increase in poverty and so forth. Despite the increase recently in the police budget, we have not seen an increase in the number of police officers patrolling neighborhoods. It required Councilmember Kretz actually to spend $100,000 of his own office's discretionary funding to allocate extra resources to the Melrose community during the spike of homicides over the last year. What we need to do, we generally all agree on this issue, is narrow the responsibility of police officers, get them out of desk jobs. We haven't really talked about is the mental health responsibilities of police officers. We mentioned it, but 140,000 phone calls a year go to LAPD related to homelessness. The majority of them relate to mental health calls. There's a reason why it takes an hour for a police officer to respond to you if you have a non-emergency, non-violent issue.
Okay.
There's too much on their plate, and we got to make sure that that money, to your point, is well spent in improving the police department. Community policing programs are really valuable in making those partnerships with the community and with nonprofits.
Thank you so much. Ma'am, in the floor.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm a mental health clinician in Los Angeles. And so many of you have talked about mental health, which is great. But I'm also seeing that in my field, we're all burnt out. The turnover is super high, especially for those of us that work in county contracts with the Department of Mental Health. So I guess I'm wondering, what are some of the ways that you're planning on partnering with the county to support all of these amazing mental health initiatives?
Great question. Let's start with Jimmy.
Yeah.
Maybe we do an unwind.
Exactly.
I can hear the burnout in your voice, and I can only imagine what the past couple of years have been like on this front. I think of mental health. My grandmother was the suicide prevention director for the state of Washington, so mental health has long been in my family lineage and something that I prize and value. We have mental health clinicians who are painfully overworked and tragically underpaid. And that's my North Star. How do we reduce the number of hours that individual mental health care providers are working? That's a question of resources, hiring, targeted hiring, building out pipeline programs, apprenticeship programs, partnering with local universities so that we're assuring sufficient staffing, and sufficient wages, right? So that this is a job that is one that can be sustainable across a career and not one that folks can do in their 20s and 30s and then say no more. So that's really how I think about it. And that partnership with the county is one that is programmatic and financial in how we think about it, but it's reduced hours through more staffing and working to increase wages. So this is much more of a bona fide reality that will also help with the success of street engagement.
Thanks, Jim. Scott?
Yeah. Thank you so much for the question. So wages and prioritizing your work. This pandemic and our homeless crisis and so much has put so much strain on our mental health workers. And we value them by paying them what they deserve. So I will be a champion on that. And we also value them by creating a support structure around them that says, this is a priority of our government, right? It's a priority that we build a comprehensive system that cares for our unhoused neighbors and everyone that's experiencing mental health challenges. So that will be my priority, is to prioritize you.
Thank you. Sam?
First off, thank you, Sarah, for your service. You're obviously critical in this fight towards helping people get their lives back on track. I think we've all had some mental health issues over the last 2+ years in the pandemic, and I know you're in the front lines of saving lives. On the short term, obviously, we have to improve wages and conditions and apprentice programs in the pipeline, and that's something I support. But long term, there's this idea of mental health parity, which means the money in healthcare is in emergency rooms and big procedures, right? But there's very little pennies on the dollar for mental health, and that's why the money runs out after 3 days. That's why people are discharged at emergency room who might be unhoused and they fall back onto the streets. They're not being caught by the system. We have to make, at the state level, unfortunately, because we don't have the dollars at the city level, but we can advocate for it, is a massive infusion of this $90+ billion that we have of our tax dollars at the state surplus level to create a real mental health safety net. The big institutions, the private sector, everyone needs to work together to help people. We know that it becomes incredibly expensive and difficult to help someone when trauma and mental health issues and addiction issues get worse over time.
Okay.
We really need to make that investment right now with mental health parity.
Thank you. Katie?
So I probably shouldn't say this because I'm running against you, Jimmy, but I agree with everything you said. So I'm just going to steal that and take it. It's right. We need better working conditions, better hours, better wages, better pipelines and training programs, better partnerships with our universities. This is a question, I think, that's really about collaboration. The city doesn't run its own health department. As you correctly noted, the county does. They run the mental health department. During the initial months of COVID, I served as our interim public health deputy under Supervisor Kuehl, and I saw how understaffed and broken the department was. There aren't enough mental health workers, and they're not being deployed in a way that protects their own mental health, ironically. And I've been talking a lot with LAHSA's new interim head, a woman named Molly Reisman, who I used to be a colleague with in Supervisor Kuehl's office, and she was saying the biggest shortage in terms of specialization that they're missing in terms of street engagement is around mental health providers. And that's true all the way up. There's a huge shortage of mental health providers. And so collaboration is how we're going to solve the problem. It's moving again back up to the funding streams that have the biggest pots of money, the state and the feds, and bringing those resources here, being champions on the council, saying as the second largest city in the United States, we need more.
Okay, we are past time, so give me a moment to provide a transition, please. We booked our candidates through 4, and some of them do have other engagements. I don't want to obligate them by hostage to stay on the stage. So first, let me just thank everybody for coming. We deeply appreciate your time. To my neighbors, our candidates have staffers here. They're going to be outside. Look for their shirts to continue the conversation and ask your questions that you didn't get to share today. Thank you so much for attending. I also would be remiss to not advocate that if you're not already a member of the association, please join. It's $15 and we advocate for you, for your rights here at Park Brea. So help us help you by joining the association. Sign up for our mailing list before you leave. And also, thank you. Please vote early and often in true Chicago style. Your ballots have arrived. The primary is a jungle primary on June 7th. Early voting across the street is opening next weekend. And please make sure you vote and finish your conversations, please, in the foyer. Thank you so much, candidates. Thank you so much, neighbors. Happy Sunday.